We're about to be standing room only if this keeps going. This is awesome.
Lots of chairs over here, folks.
Yeah, it's a weird L-shaped room. Lots of chairs over here.
It's like a Tetris piece.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm impressed. I heard a few people out there in the audience that were singing along with every single iteration of the theme song. So good job, guys.
That's
Yeah.
great. All right, so let's get a little context going here. So we have to take ourselves back to the early 1980s, specifically 1981, when some industrious low-budget producers named Gull and Globus decided that the kung fu craze of the 1970s was over, and they really wanted to move on to something else. These were the gentlemen that gave us the live-action Masters of the Universe. They gave us Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. I know I'm not selling them real well. But what they did give us in 1981 or 82 was Enter the Ninja with Sho Kosugi, who was one of the last great ninja masters and stunt artists, who's thankfully still alive. He recently did Ninja Assassin. And from Enter the Ninja, we ended up getting a trilogy, including Revenge of the Ninja and Ninja 3, The Domination, also starring Lucinda Dickey, who you might know from Breakin', and Breakin' 2, Electric Boogaloo. But that's neither here nor there. The point is that ninjas had become the new Bruce Lee. They had supplanted Kung Fu as the new fad by 1984. This is Remco's Secret of the Ninja action figure line from 1984. The ninja craze was huge. And so at this point, two struggling comic book artists were goofing around one night. And I'll let my co-host take over from here.
Go ahead.
So we got Peter Laird and Kevin Eastman, who were, like you said, struggling artists for comic books and sort of very zine, like independent zine level of stuff. And so one night they were sort of messing around and drawing sketches, and the one guy was like, hey, I'm combining all these things from all these different comics that are out right now, and I'm going to make this little drawing of a turtle, but I'm going to make it a ninja. And so he passed it over to him, and he's like, oh, well, maybe we could add some more Ninja Turtle things and add more gear. And so they just kept one-upping each other, and this is the original drawing that they kind of came up with. And from there, they were like, hey, actually, they were making up little stories about these turtles that they had drawn and thinking, hey, this would make a pretty good comic book, kind of a tongue-in-cheek parody of a lot of things that were out at the time. And they created Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the comic. And originally, they only produced like 3,000 comics because they were expecting it to be kind of a lower-level type of thing. They took out a lot of loans from friends and stuff like that and got these 3,000 sold, and they flew off the shelves. Like they were a complete sellout thing.
Yeah, it wasn't even in the traditional comic format size. Their printer didn't get it right. So the original number one issue, which only had 3,000 copies, you can always tell because there's that drawing, but then on the lower right to the right and on bottom of that drawing is this extra layer of black that comes out for like a half inch, and it's because the comic was the wrong format. And it was also black and white. It was not colorized. It was a very low budget production.
It's since been colorized, and you can buy it as a fully bound volume of all of their stuff, and it's colorized. But originally it was black and white, and it was probably just your regular like $2 or $3. But now, if you want an original, you're going to be paying a nice hefty chunk. This is one that actually sold on eBay. I just looked it up, and it sold on June 27th of this year for over $10,000. So,
yeah.
So the artists at the time were big fans of what Frank Miller was doing with Daredevil and how he was bringing in the kind of ninja craze into the book. They really loved Frank Miller's dark, gritty kind of writing style.
So they borrowed from the Daredevil origin. What they really did, which is kind of funny, is they took kind of an alternative perspective on the Daredevil origin. They said, what we're going to do is we're going to show it from a different perspective and show you what happened. They didn't actually say this in their comic book because that's called copyright violation, but this is what they clearly did. They're like, okay, Daredevil gets hit in the head with this radioactive canister. Well, what happened to that canister after it went flying off? And so they said, well, let's see what happens. Oh, it hits a fishbowl of turtles that are being carried down the sidewalk, and then it spills into the sewer with the turtles, and then the turtles become these mutant ninjas. Well, So the same day that the Turtles became mutant ninjas, Daredevil became a superhero, according to them.
Yeah,
which is kind of cool.
kind of interesting because I don't think anyone before had ever done this where they took the exact thing and showed it from a different angle and said, yeah, but this other stuff also happened too. Other people have done it since, but I think this was probably one of the first times they did something like that. Like we said, they borrowed a lot from Daredevil. So in Daredevil, you've got Stick was his sort of sensei or his trainer, and we've got Splinter in Ninja Turtles, obviously. And in Daredevil, you've got the Hand, who is the evil organization, and so they kind of intentionally chose the Foot to be the bad guys in Ninja Turtles. So again, they're really, and they took from the, and my mind's going blank, Cerebus,
Yes.
with the anthropomorphic animal, that becomes a human, instead of a human becoming part animal, like Wolverine and all these other characters who went sort of from human to sort of human-animal mix. This is an actual animal who's becoming part human, so it's kind of an interesting reversal.
Yeah, so the original Ninja Turtles can also always be denoted by the fact that they, when they're colorized, they wear all red headbands. This was because the comic book was originally black and white, and they weren't really thinking about color. So when they did the colorized versions, they just said, well, the personalities are already distinct and can be identified by the weapons and the dialogue. So we're not really thinking about this headband color thing.
Yeah, there was also no cowabunga, there was no pizza. This was a very dark comic. This shows the actual death of Shredder. And it's pretty intense,
There's real violence, there's real,
mutilation.
It's a mature comic. It wasn't really
not
specifically for children.
Right. As you can see, Shredder at the bottom of that panel getting skewered by Leonardo in the first issue. It was much like Dick Tracy in this comic book, where they talk about how in the disadvantage Dick Tracy had compared to Batman is that Dick Tracy would kill his villains at the end of the story, whereas Batman would put them in Arkham Asylum. Well, the original Turtles comic book, the villains that would crop up would either they'd get away from them or they'd vanquish them by the end of the issue. It was pretty interesting, but that means that you got a lot of these villains coming in very quickly into the run of the comic.
Well, and the writers also didn't realize that this was going to become the fad that it did, and so they wrote it as kind of a one-shot. They were expecting to just go out and spend a little bit of money, produce this one book, and say, hey, you know what, we put a book out on the market, and so they killed off their main villain instantly in the first book, and then the demand for more and more issues started cropping up, and they were like, well, we've got to rethink this.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because Eastman and Laird, it's really watching a progression from being these really independent artists who were working on a zine to like these corporate people who are thinking in terms of merchandising and things like that. And one of them kind of did like that, and the other one kind of didn't like that so much. And so their personalities and what they ended up doing because of the nature of change of this franchise, they went from being artists and writers to being like these corporate suit guys, and those are very different things, so it's kind of an interesting story.
Yeah, and in the first run of the series, by issue 2, we get 2 new key characters that we all know well. We get April O'Neil and we get Baxter Stockman. Now, in the tradition of the first issue, Baxter Stockman, they think he's dead by the end of the issue, but he is a mad scientist who's building these Mouser robots to, allegedly, the front is he's going to help rid New York of the rodent problem, but he's really crazy and he wants to take humans out as well. April O'Neil is actually his lab assistant. She's not a reporter for Channel 6. She's a lab assistant who realizes that her boss is crazy, and she tries to get away from him, and he dumps her into the sewer and has the Mousers chase her, which is something that they kind of allude to in the cartoon later, but it's not in the same context.
There are a lot of different interpretations of April O'Neil. She goes all the way from the character that Michael just described to the cartoon character, which I think most of us in here know, and then these other various incarnations all the way through Megan Fox, who's seen the new movie?
I had a free ticket.
Okay, there's no judgment. So raise your hands again if you liked the new movie.
Give it like a C.
Okay, so it's
Okay.
like it's about half and half. Okay.
We're going to temper our comments based on what you guys say. So the audience doesn't turn on us.
No, but April O'Neil's evolution is interesting because she seems to be the one character where they are okay completely changing her up every generation. First she's a lab assistant, then she's a news reporter. She stays that way through the first peak of Ninja Turtles' popularity. Then they evolve her into a ninja voiced by Buffy the Vampire Slayer for the 2007 movie. And then in the latest Nickelodeon cartoon, she's a teenager who has no connection to any profession whatsoever. She's just looking for her father. April's, and now of course in the latest film, they're being nostalgic and they're bringing her back to being a reporter. But the actual cartoons and comic books seem to play with that character a lot. Yeah, there were other characters that were introduced very quickly into the original comics. You had the Krang, which was not singular; it was a plural alien race. They lived in the stomachs of these androids that they would use to move around around New York City. They weren't actually bad guys in the original comic. You think they're bad guys at first, but they actually turn out to be these aliens just trying to find their way home.
They kind of look like a Trill meets a what's it?
Terminator?
No, the little furry balls.
Tribble?
It's hard to say Trill and Tribble at the same time, but that's what they kind of look like to me.
And then you get Casey Jones in the first time Casey Jones ever appears in the original comic is in a standalone comic. They did 4 comics outside of the issue 1 through whatever run called. Each one was named after one of the turtles. So in the Raphael issue, that's when they get the Raphael standalone issue is when Casey Jones is introduced. And then of course we also go ahead.
I was just going to say a little factoid about Casey Jones. Does anybody have any idea about where his origin kind of came about or inspiration for
We've
Casey
got
Jones?
prizes for whoever can guess.
Raise your hand.
Grateful Dead? Well, I'm not sure that that's the answer we're looking for.
I thought he was just made as a foil for Raph to make sure that don't act like Casey Raph. Look what happens, kind of thing. Don't be that crazy.
Well, but the writers have said that they drew specific inspiration from another character at the time.
Right back here.
They were big fans of things like Dirty Harry and things like that. And so they wanted a vigilante who was motivated not by just doing the right thing, but by watching all this bad TV. He watched a lot of trash TV, and so that made him want to go out and be a hero just because.
Hey, you're giving away the prize.
That is yes, that's right along the lines.
Oh, wait. Yes? Yes? Go ahead, Batgirl. Oh. Okay.
Well, I like your answer. They actually said that they drew a lot of inspiration for Casey Jones from the character Jack Burton from a great movie called Big Trouble in Little China. That's where a lot of his mannerisms came from. That's where a lot of his kind of attitude came from. So, but yes, he did watch a lot of trash TV, and he did figure out that he wanted to be a vigilante.
Does that earn him a prize?
I think it does.
Yeah.
I think it does. It's
Come on up.
We have 4 prizes.
We have 4 prizes. You get to choose.
So, the next time you see the old Casey Jones, think of Jack Burton and
my
his
favorite.
All right. Well done.
Thank
Well
you.
done.
his inner outer monologues.
Yeah.
All right. Good work.
Okay.
There were a few merchandising tie-ins early on. There weren't many, but there were a few. We had the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Other Strangeness role-playing game on the left, which was it was pretty good role-playing game actually. My brother had it when we were kids. Unfortunately, when the cartoon came out, that was so different from the comic books, which is what the role-playing game was based on. Everybody who went into a comic book or role-playing shop looked at that and said, "I'm not buying that."
Well,
That's
think
for little
about it.
kids."
Like role-playing games are marketed toward teenagers and young adults, right? And so if
And
suddenly this
somethings.
well right, but and me, but I mean, so like if you're going into a store and you suddenly go Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, that's for like 5-year-olds. I'm 15 and I'm way too cool for that. Then apparently their sales plummeted like that overnight when the cartoon hit. So
Yeah, because nobody realized it wasn't tied to a cartoon. A lot of people didn't know about the independent comic at that point. All right, here we go. 1987. Who wants to take this?
You.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. 1987, we all get the awesome cartoon and Playmates toy line that shows up. And the cartoon really changed the game. It made the Ninja Turtles the household name that it is. It's probably why all of us are sitting here today talking about the Ninja Turtles 30 years later. It took it to a universal place where it said, you know what, we have to make this series of characters universally appealing for everybody. How are we going to do that? Well, the first thing they did was they said, you know what, all of these guys look the same. We have to make sure that kids can identify them by their not just their personalities, but visually. And so they gave them the multicolored headbands, which they're rocking it right now.
Yeah.
Round of applause. And in doing so, they created these iconic characters that we all know and love. Now, one of the other changes that they made, of course, is April O'Neil becoming a newscaster. The Krang is now singular. He's one guy who has the Technodrome underneath New York City, and the Shredder is almost his crony because he's, he can't go anywhere because he needs a body. Like he's, so they expanded on those things a little bit. An interesting change they made, as we all know, Baxter Stockman went from being an independent mad scientist to being a misguided, inventor, who was really just looking for funding for his robots. And he got hooked up with the Shredder under false pretenses. And then he ended up getting turned into the Fly, which I feel bad for him in the cartoon. It's like, man, you just don't make good decisions.
But the cartoon allowed for the greater merchandising of the toys. And that's actually it sort of was like a thing where they came up with these toys. Eastman and Laird were approached by a number of merchandisers, and they were like, hey, we want to do different things to merchandise your turtles. We think they would sell really well. And they were sort of choosy at the beginning, and they got involved with this guy who went to Playmates and said, hey, I've got this great idea for these Ninja Turtle things. Can we make some toys? And they were like, well, yeah, we want to develop the toys, but we think that we're going to need to find a way to market them through a cartoon. And so they basically developed the five episode miniseries that's at the very beginning of the Ninja Turtles, which in my opinion is the best part of the cartoon. But so you've got this 5-episode thing where they introduced the Turtles, and it took them airing that about 3 times before it really got its hold. And kids were like, yeah, these Turtles are awesome. And so they released the toys, and they were very successful because they had kind of primed everyone for what was coming in terms of the toys. And so the toys really sold very well.
Yeah, how many of you guys played with these, and girls, played with these when you were kids? See, everybody, pretty much. Yeah, I think the Ninja Turtles are appealing because they don't ever get dated. You can take that character, those 4 guys, and drop them in any time frame, and they're still relevant. They don't look a specific way. They're just universally appealing to everybody. I think that's why we all like them. The cool thing about the Playmates line originally was that they weren't really a player in action figures. This was like their first foray into action figures. They weren't a Kenner, they weren't a Hasbro or a Mattel. And so when they took this line on, everybody else had passed on it. They were like, Teenage Mutant Ninja, what? No, that's dumb.
Disney had scoffed at the line.
Yeah.
There really wasn't much interest in the market for the line.
And then what's funny is that Playmates actually told the animators after the 5-episode miniseries was over and was so successful, they said, well, we want to do more cartoons. And Playmates said, no, we're good. We're fine. And Fred Wolf Productions was like, are you crazy? Can we make more? I mean, if you want to. And so they did, and because the idea from Playmates was there's a 3-year cycle to a successful action figure line. There's the introductory year, there's the peak year, and then there's the drop-off year, and then it's over. So they figured it wasn't going to last beyond 3 years. Well, Ninja Turtles was on television from 1987 to 1996. So the toys lasted far beyond anyone's expectations. Yeah, I mean, kaboom! Any anthropomorphized animal you can think of, they made an action figure of it. I'm sure there's a platypus in there somewhere if we look hard. It just went on to the point that they even had April O'Neil in a cave woman outfit at one point. It was expansive.
We have a question.
Yes.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't they have a problem with like having enough action figures? Like they were having to just create these like phony characters almost just to keep selling them and stuff?
Absolutely, because they were trying to fill the market up with the different. In other words, every wave that came out, they had to find more characters to pique kids' interest. You're absolutely correct. And so they actually had the artists at Mirage Studios from the original Ninja Turtles comic crew. They told them, they said, you can design characters for Playmates. Make any design you want. If you sell it, you'll get profits from that figure. We don't care. Because they were so busy. Eastman and Laird were so busy trying to manage the company at that point.
Yeah, because again, we're talking about artists. Like, artists aren't necessarily the most business-minded people, and so they were trying to really protect their artists in terms of making sure that they got paid, making sure they had some sort of ownership of the characters that they created, which in that industry, even like then, now, whenever, is pretty rare because artists get screwed over all the time. If anyone is an artist, then you know what I'm talking about. But they really tried, although they still ended up having lots of lawsuits. And one of the things that I think we'll talk about a little bit more later too is that part of merchandising these things is merchandising them in other countries, and you have to get all these patents and copyrights in order to protect your investment, because people would make these knockoffs all the time overseas. Like, you know, they would find out, oh, like they told the story about how, like, somewhere in the Middle East, this guy found out about Ninja Turtle craze here in America, and he knew that it was coming there. He knew they were going to be trying to get a patent. So he went ahead and patented it there. And so he was like, oh, you want to use this? You're going to have to pay me. And so it's this whole thing, and that's what they kind of got obsessed with having to manage, was protecting their patents and protecting their copyrights on these characters. And it's just like, okay, I just want to go back to drawing comics now.
Yeah. So Usagi Yojimbo is to your point. Shackelford? Is it Shackelford? Yeah. Is to your. It's so great when a Ghostbuster's in the room because you know their name. They were really desperate to get the line bulked up. And so what they even did was they reached out to other comic book artists who had drawn anthropomorphized animal characters and said, hey, can we license your character for our toy line? And the guy for Usagi Yojimbo said, yeah, you can have an action figure of him. That'd be awesome. And so they made an action figure, and he appeared in 2 or 3 episodes of the cartoon as well, teaming up with the Ninja Turtles, which is pretty funny because he's a samurai and they're ninja, so they really shouldn't be friends at all. It's also interesting to me that he's this warrior guy who looks pretty angry, while the rest of them are pizza-loving, surfing Ninja Turtles. It's a good foil.
It's kind of interesting because I'm sure that a lot of people in here know the difference between a ninja and a samurai, but back then in the 80s, a lot of kids really didn't know the difference, that a ninja was kind of like the lower class, and they were just assassins for hire, and they would just pretty much murder anybody if you paid them to. So there wasn't this whole code of honor in reality, but ninja just sounds so cool. It's like got 2 syllables and it pops. Samurai is just a little bit longer word, and I think some of it has to do with, like, when you're saying Teenage Mutant Ninja Samurai or Teenage Samurai.
Yeah. Teenage Mutant
Samurai
Samurai
Turtles.
Ninjas.
See what I'm saying? So it doesn't flow.
This brings us to a good opportunity for a trivia question to get a prize. Can someone tell me what the Ninja Turtles were called in Britain? Oh my God!
I think that guy back there had his hand up first.
Okay, which one?
The guy in the black shirt with his hand still up.
You are correct, sir. Come on down.
Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles.
Hero Turtles.
Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles. My family moved to England in 1990, and that was at the height of the Ninja Turtle craze. And when we got over there, everything said Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles, and I was like, what's up with this? Come to find out, ninja over there, they frown on. Come on up. They frown on that word because they actually see it almost as a very negative thing for children. They think that ninjas, they were. Oh,
Have it.
all right.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
They frown on it because they feel like it's too violent. It has a violent connotation. It's an assassin guy. They even went so far in the cartoons, it was a very big cop job. They were having a lot of crimes taking place, people robbing convenience stores with nunchucks. And so Michelangelo was cut down to just cracking wise and eating pizza. His action figure didn't come with the nunchucks. The pictures of him was always him with pizza. You could tell, like when you watch the cartoon over there, that it would just suddenly cut away from Michelangelo right before a battle started. I mean, it was wild. And then they later reintroduced the ninja thing, but the nunchucks thing never came back. And if you watch the cartoon all the way through the run, all 6, 7 seasons, whatever it is, Michelangelo slowly changes over to taking on a grappling hook weapon in the American cartoon. That's why, because they got tired of having to re-edit the show for England. So they just switched his weapon so they didn't have to do it. Some of the characters from the original comic book made their way into the action figure line, including the Fugitoid and the Triceratons, who were an enemy in, I believe, the 4th or 5th issue of the original comic. So they leaked their way into the toy line. So for people who love the original Eastman and Laird comic book, there are actually a few action figures from the line that are really worth owning, even if you don't like the cartoon version.
Yeah, and the comic books, like I said, because they were so mature, kids still like to read comic books. So they kind of created this other version of the comics that is more geared toward children. And it was called Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Adventures.
Yeah, did you want to take this one, Joe? Oh, no, you're good? Yeah, did anyone read Ninja Turtles Adventures? You did? I did. Well, yeah. A lot of
This whole side of the room.
Yeah, a lot of the characters that were developed for the action figure line by the Mirage Studios artists ended up in the Ninja Turtles Adventures, Wingnut and Screw Loose and a few of those other guys. And then they actually had a spin-off comic called The Mighty Mutanimals for a little while, which was just about the side characters from the Ninja Turtles. But this comic book was very much based on the cartoon. It wasn't in continuity with the cartoon, but it had the same feel, the same style, and they went off on some interesting adventures. Now, the Mighty Mutanimals, though, had a dark ending, if I recall. Am I jumping ahead in the presentation?
I don't know.
Okay. It had this
I don't know
dark.
where you're going with that.
It had this dark ending where, at the end of the last issue, all the Mutanimals seemed to have been killed off, and it was an Archie comic, like an Archie brand comic book. It was like, wait, this is bizarre. So they took some dark turns, but it was a distinctly different experience from the Eastman Laird comic.
And the comic books were just sort of the beginning because, and so were the toys, because as anyone who was alive during that time will remember, there was all kinds of stuff that had Ninja Turtles on it, cereal and cookies, and apparently there was Crazy Putty. So, I mean, you know.
There was also custard pies.
Yep.
There were a lot of food products for the
the
Turtles,
custard
which I
pies.
don't really know why, because I think, sewers and, toxic waste doesn't necessarily feel appetizing, but I guess for a kid it totally does.
I ate the Chef Boyardee Ninja Turtles pasta.
Yeah.
It was pretty rocking.
And I don't know if we can make this into a question, but
Yeah.
does anyone remember anything about a recent, and when I say recent, I mean within the last 5 or 10 years, reference back to the Chef Boyardee? No?
No one. Okay,
No, I was thinking of something else.
Okay, so there's a newer commercial that has Vanilla Ice.
Oh,
That's the Kraft mac and cheese.
Oh, it's mac and cheese. Okay,
Yeah.
never mind.
That made a reference to the second movie.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yes.
I'm going to let you take this one.
All right, so we all know in the mid-'80s, arcades were big, Nintendo was coming out, and so who went to the arcade and played the four-person turtle game? All right.
And how many people wasted sockfuls of quarters on it?
It's because you got so far, and if you didn't continue, then you have to start all over again.
Right,
Yep.
right. And sorry, go ahead, Joe.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that the Ninja Turtles arcade game from Konami, while we had Double Dragon before that, and we had Bad Dudes, which who cares about that game, the Ninja Turtles arcade game was the one that established the 4-person beat 'em up for the rest of the industry for the next 3 or 4 years. And it's what prompted the Simpsons arcade game to come out, and Crime Fighters, and the X-Men arcade game, and then they even had a sequel to their own arcade game in the arcade. It was a 4-person sequel, which never happened, except until Street Fighter. When Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat came out, they started having beat 'em up or fighting game sequels. But this was the only one that was like a beat 'em up sequel. I'd never seen anything like it. It was an amazing game.
So you'd go in, and there would be lines at the arcade, because everybody had their favorite character that they'd want to play with. And so you'd have to wait for somebody to finally give up the Michelangelo or the Donatello. And it was this kind of crazy experience, because, like Michael was saying, it hadn't been that way before. You could just go in and jump on a game. But to finally be able to play with 3 of your buddies and, fight through these levels was, it was innovative.
And then there was a crowd around you.
Yeah.
And I remember playing it the first time at a tilt in Nashville, and this crowd was around me pressing. And when you were the one up front, you were like a rock star. It was like, oh, he got to get in the front of the line and play. And I remember the kid behind me kind of being disappointed that I had another quarter. And he was like, but he played it cool because I put the quarter in, and I'll never forget what he said. He's like, oh, Leonardo's back to attack. So yeah, and we also all played the Nintendo game, but I guess we're moving on. So the Nintendo game was impossible. Look up the Angry Video Game Nerd video about it. It's a horrible game.
Completely different from what we were all
Impossible.
expecting from the
You can't beat
arcade
it.
game.
No, you can't beat it. All right, so 1990, we're moving along. 1990, we get Jim Henson, Golden Harvest, and New Line Cinema teaming up to bring us a live-action Ninja Turtles movie. Yay. Yeah, which was awesome. Does anybody remember the preview photos in Nintendo Power, where they would show like one grainy photograph of like Raphael on the roof, and you'd be like, I don't know if this is going to be any good or not. It looked as low budget in the photos as it was in the production, but the end result, I don't think anyone can argue, was stellar. The Ninja Turtles movie, the 1990 version, I think deserves more credit than it gets. Quite honestly.
Yeah, I hear a lot of people talk, particularly not geek people, but just sort of regular people who kind of remember. They're like, "Oh, it's so cheesy and it looks so lame." And I'm thinking, are you comparing it to current CGI standards or what? Because there were, a lot of really great things about the movie. It was really dark. It focused. It was kind of much more like the comic book than the cartoon, which I thought was really awesome for film. You have Jim Henson and his great animatronics working those masks. They had all kinds of mechanisms inside there to make their faces move and stuff like that, and amazing stunts by people who were just flipping around in these huge bulky turtle costumes, but they were doing real like stunts and flips and stuff like that. And you had Corey Feldman, so I mean, how can you really go wrong?
Now this is a good opportunity for a trivia question. Can anyone tell us who the gentleman is in the turtle suit in that photograph? It is Ernie Reyes Jr. Come on up. You get to choose.
It's a great shirt.
All right.
Thanks.
Well done. All right. Yeah, there were a lot of parallels between the original comic book and the movie. You had the fight with Casey Jones and Raph in the park. You had the Foot Clan smashing through April's April's apartment. In the comic book, it was Leonardo that gets beset by the Foot Clan and beaten up. In the movie, it's Raphael. And so some of the shots are panel for panel. It's like he comes crashing through the skylight. You have the antique shop fight. You have the shot of her looking back as her antique shop burns to the ground. You've got the farmhouse. Now, an interesting change is that in the comic book, the farmhouse was owned by Casey Jones. In the movie, the farmhouse is owned by April O'Neil. So that was a little change. But you even go so far, they match shots like Raphael on the roof of the barn. You've got, this is an interesting one. So they cut it from the movie for the most part, but they have like 2 shots of it. It's a brief cut during a montage where April is narrating, and you see Michelangelo going to town on a punching bag. Well, if you ever watch the film and pay attention to April's journal narration, she tells everybody what Leonardo's doing. She tells everybody what Donatello is doing. She tells everybody that Raph is, still in the bathtub. But she never mentions Michelangelo. And it's because in the comic book version of this, which they clearly filmed, they filmed it and then I guess decided we better not show this. Michelangelo is shown having not freaked out, but gotten the most angry about what happened to them in the antique shop.
Imagine that.
And even though he's the fun-loving, wisecracking turtle compared to the other 4, or the other 3, he actually has the most pent-up rage, and he's the most dangerous turtle among them. And April watches him destroy the punching bag before he destroys the barn. Like, he destroys the inside of the barn. And I sit back and I go, man, I want to see that deleted scene.
Yeah.
I would love to see
Yeah.
that in the movie, because that gives an extra facet to Michelangelo's personality, that buried rage, which I think is awesome. They even have the scene with Casey Jones and one of the turtles fixing the truck. In the movie, it's Donatello. In the comic book, I believe it's Raphael. Yeah. Yeah. And they have the fight on the roof with the Shredder at the very end. And let's talk about the knockoffs. Yeah, you want to take this?
Go ahead.
Okay. So the Ninja Turtles had their imitators. Imitation is the best form of flattery, and everybody wanted to get in on the Ninja Turtles craze. And so they all tried to think up these anthropomorphized characters. The most overt was Samurai Pizza Cats. It was like, wow, you guys are you've got brass ones just to do that. That's,
The intro is amazing.
it is amazing.
You can forget the rest of the show, but the intro
Yeah, it follows the same pattern as Jason the Wheeled Warriors. The intro is rocking to the point that you have it on your iPod, but the rest of the show's crap.
Yeah. And it tricks you every time. You're like, this is going to be amazing. And then you start watching the show and you're like, oh.
Yeah. You have Biker Mice from Mars. Anybody who collects those action figures, I got to ask you some questions after this panel's over. Street Sharks. Yeah, Street Sharks was a big Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles imitator. And then you had
cartoon was a bit of a letdown.
Yes.
But
yes.
the toys sold.
And then you had even weirder ones like Barnyard Commandos, which was Ninja Turtles meets Animal Farm meets Rambo. And then you had Bucky O'Hare, which I believe was probably the most credible of all of these, because it really was trying to be its own thing, kind of like it was almost like one part Ninja Turtles, one part Flash Gordon, one part Howard the Duck, one part that Green Rabbit from the Marvel Star Wars comics. It was weird. Oh boy.
Yeah.
The second one was okay.
Yeah. We have a defender. Yes.
I don't know if you're going to bring up, but some of the one of the great things were the cartoon parodies. Like there was Ghostbusters, and even Tiny Toons had like the premature something as Samurai Slugs. They basically Hampton and Bucky decided to be slugs, and their main enemy was called the Iodizer. It was a shredder with a cell shaker.
That sounds kinetic. That is funny. Yeah, the Ninja Turtles movie was on a budget of $13 million, but it made back $201 million. Now keep in mind, that was 1990. 7 years before, Return of the Jedi had a budget of $32 million. So even adjusted for inflation, the Ninja Turtles movie was really on a shoestring, but it made back major bank. Now, what ended up happening was they said, we think this fad is going to go away fast. They were just as guilty of this, the producers of the movie, as the toy company was. They said, we got to get another movie out quickly. So the very next year, they brought out Secret of the Ooze. Unfortunately, that movie only made back about $80 million and change. Yeah. What's that?
That's it.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it had a higher budget and a lower box office. But they still felt like that the franchise was strong enough. You know, you had Vanilla Ice in the movie, who's now, from his legacy with the film, he's become a Ninja Turtles collector. Not just the stuff from part 2, but I think there was an episode of The Toy Hunter where he was buying stuff from the guy. I'm not going to go into The Toy Hunter. Anyway.
We're not touching that.
We're not touching that. So they brought out, in 1993, they brought out Ninja Turtles 3, Turtles in Time. Does anyone remember seeing this in the theater? I'm guilty. I'm guilty. I think the saddest part about this movie is the fact that Jim Henson had died right after the first movie. And then when they did the second film, you can tell that his expertise wasn't there anymore, helping out with the animatronics. And so they didn't look terrible, but they had started to look a little too, I mean, there was like something going on. They were starting to look a little Chuck E. Cheese.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and by part 3,
Yeah, you can see the eye slits, you know?
yeah. And by part 3, it's bad. Like by part 3, it looks like the Showbiz animatronic Rockafire explosion show at the pizza joint. Like, Splinter, you never see him freestanding. He's always behind like a window of a subway car or something. He almost looks like a character in Sesame Street. It's really awful, and the story wasn't very good, and the film was just a dud, as it should have been. This was called Ninja Turtles: The Next Mutation, for those of you who haven't suffered it until now. And it intro. Yes, it was.
Yeah.
It
It was
was.
very much Power Rangers inspired.
Yeah, it was like, well, we've got these live action technologies down. We're going to do them worse than we've ever done them before. But we want to compete with the Power Rangers by doing a live action show instead of an animated show. And we're going to introduce Venus de Milo as the female. Wow, there's some hate out there. For
I heard Peter Laird won't even talk about it.
Peter Laird is actually the one of the two who is much more of a purist, and he sort of doesn't like a lot of the directions that the franchise has taken, although at this point they've both signed away their rights and sold their shares of ownership, although they still get paychecks for, you know, when the movie's doing whatever. But so the difference being that Kevin Eastman loves the new movie. Peter Laird really doesn't like the new movie.
Yeah.
He hates the new movie. So there's your difference there.
Yeah. Well, we're going to move on from this, but we just had to share our pain. All right. So in 2003, we get a new animated property for Ninja Turtles. It's a solid show, and it's too bad that the DVDs are starting to roll out of print, because if you haven't seen it, it's a really good Ninja Turtles experience. I would highly recommend tracking it down and watching it. Has everyone? How many? What's that? It's on YouTube. Cool. How many people have seen this show? And keep your hands up. How many people liked it? Now pull your hands down for those who don't like it. Oh, okay. So it's pretty solid. There's a few people who, but.
So if you don't like it, what do you dislike about it?
Oh, anyone who disliked it, what do they not like? We're not going to attack you. We're just curious.
Yeah.
I watched it for the first few episodes and it was on, and I just didn't think it was fun.
Oh, okay.
I've always leaned more towards the cartoony stuff.
The cartoony stuff.
Okay.
The voice actors aren't good
Really?
at all.
Yeah.
Voice actors. Okay.
Okay. Voice actors aren't good. It's not as close to the original cartoon. Keep that in mind for anyone who hasn't seen it. But
The original comics, which is awesome.
it is closer to the original comics. That is true. So that prompted the popularity of that prompted TMNT in 2007, a CGI pseudo follow-up to the live-action movies. It's kind of like the Superman Returns of TMNT, except the fact that it was good.
It was good.
In the sense that, you know, it was a sequel, but not really, but kind of. It kind of tied in, but didn't. The thing I like about it is that it gets things a little closer to the roots of the original comic. You have this amazing fight between Raphael and Leonardo on the roof of the building. They are in conflict in this film, and they have to come back together. April's a ninja, which is a little, but at least she's hanging out with Casey Jones, which is cool. And the other thing that's a little weird, even though Patrick Stewart is in it, which is awesome, Patrick Stewart can do no wrong. The plot is a little esoteric. It's about these, trans-dimensional demons that are coming through a portal, and so there's no Shredder, there's no Baxter Stockman, there's no Krang. That's a little bit of a bummer, but overall it's a very solid story and it's worth your time watching. It's really good. All right, who likes the Nickelodeon show? Nice. Okay, good deal. What? Yeah, this show, it took me a few episodes to get into the groove with this one, but it takes April down to a teenager. She's looking for her father. The turtles are updated a little bit. Are there any kids still in the room? Oh, okay.
Do you watch the show?
Do you watch the show? Can you guys tell me what Michelangelo yells in the show? Booyakasha. Well done. Do you have this DVD of the original show? Do you have it? You have it now. Come on up and get it. A little cowabunga for your Booyakasha. Oh.
You got it?
As long as his foot is okay, that's all I care about.
So why are we saying that word now instead of cowabunga? So we were just going to kind of go through the origins of cowabunga. It's a little bit contested out in the world if you go online and try to start reading about it. Some people say that it was originally on the Howdy Doody show, and yes, it was, but that was actually the name of a character who was like a very racially insensitive Indian chief guy. And but the other, it was sort of a term that was coined, I think, in the 50s or 60s by the surf culture, And so they had Snoopy back in like the 60s saying it. And then, of course, the Turtles picked it up because it was a very, you know, surfery kind of thing. I think somebody just threw it out in a cartoon pitch meeting thing. And then, of course, we had Bart Simpson saying it. I think the Turtles said it before Bart, but yeah, so you had a bunch of people saying that. And for some reason, they wanted to go a totally different direction with the new Ninja Turtles show. They wanted kids of this generation to have their own cowabunga. So they...
Well, I was surprised because they had watched the Nickelodeon Turtle show before I had, so I hadn't experienced it. And so the first time we sat down to watch it together, I heard Michelangelo say "Booyakasha," and it really threw me off because it took me back to, you know, I was watching Sacha Baron Cohen doing Ali G on HBO in the late '90s, early aughts, and you know when Michelangelo comes out with "Booyakasha," I was like, that's really awkward. That has, you know, no tie-in to anything previously in the turtle lore, and I was like, I've heard this before, and I remembered Ali G, and I was like, wow, so now we've got Michelangelo saying something that Ali G, this you know British hip hop guy, you know, used to spout on a regular basis, and it was probably one of the most awkward experiences I had watching the Nickelodeon cartoon.
So I guess one of the things I want to point out before we move on is that the new Nickelodeon cartoon really adapts things rather well. I like the fact that, I mean, Casey Jones does look like one of the Cobra Kai on Halloween night, which is a little, but otherwise, I think the show does a really good job of updating a lot of these characters. I like the fact that the Krang are now much closer to the original comic book. They're still evil, but they are the androids, and they're Krang plural, not just one Krang, which is nice. I like some of those changes. I think they're good. Yeah.
And they have really good voice actors. So...
Although Seth Green has just taken over for Jason Biggs for Leonardo, so expect a vocal change. Yeah.
Do we have any prizes left? No prizes left? Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. That's why we dragged out the whole rest of the presentation. So now we only have 5 minutes to talk about this. I'm kidding. We actually have 10. Now, what do you guys? You've all seen the Ninja Turtles movie for the most part. Yes.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah? What'd you like about it?
It was different take. First, it was different take as they did with the turtle stuff instead of being just the ooze coming up to them. They was actually science experiments. So it was just good.
So he liked it because they were science experiments.
There was a lot of good things about it.
Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna get lambasted here. I liked it because I liked the darker tone of it, but my 5-year-old daughter who loves Ninja Turtles, I like the fact I could take her to that. There was only one bad word in it, I think, but it was good. You know, I don't ever want to live in an age where I can't take my 5-year-old kid to see a Ninja Turtle
Sure,
movie.
absolutely.
So I like the balance between the kid movie and the darker tone.
Okay. Balance between kids and dark tone. Anybody else? Yeah.
I like that the action was kind of over the top. I think it gets a lot of negatives for being big, the turtles being big and strong. But you look at the way they fight, it's actually kind of a lot like the old cartoon in terms of throwing enemies around and knocking them across the room. I felt like the snow chase sequence was like something just out of the cartoon.
Okay. Yes.
I thought that the turtles' individual personalities came across really well through their dialogue and their action, their sense of fun that made you realize even though they're like all like 7 feet tall and jacked up, they are still teenagers. I thought that was the most successful part of the movie, but I thought the plot was so full of holes and convoluted, it was just a piece of crap.
Yeah, it's the kind of Swiss cheese Splinter would like. Yes.
I just like the fact that they did try to incorporate the history of the Ninja Turtles.
Incorporate the history?
She's saying they incorporate the history.
Like in the beginning of the movie, those who saw it, they actually did the opening scene to one of the theme songs where you saw them jump into the manhole.
Right.
And they had the moon in the background, and they actually recreated that one scene in the movie from one of the theme songs. And they did a couple other parts of it.
I just think they look butchered. Yeah, I mean,
They look what?
Butchered.
They look butcher?
And Shredder
Butchered.
as well.
Or
Like,
butchered.
they just did a really awful job with adapting characters.
Is anybody else bothered by the fact that they have lips?
Yeah. Johnny's the best in that regard.
It's the nose thing.
Yeah.
What's that?
I agree.
I haven't watched the
Uh-huh.
The rest of it doesn't look so bad. It's how they look with the weird noses and the.
Right. Their looks are too intimidating. Yeah. Yes.
The thing is that they made these giant 7-8 foot tall turtles, and then you're like, okay, so we have Asian man Shredder now has to fight them, and it's like, well, he's probably gonna top out at like 5'8" at most. So it's like, how are we gonna make him more amazing to fight these giant turtles? We'll make him into half Iron Man, half Transformer dude suit thing. And it's like, that's terrible. It's like if you made him 5'2", Shredder could kick their butts. But
Yeah, it felt like there was a lot of marketing
like a lot of
behind the scenes.
compensation
Like,
that Shredder has to do
what's
to fight them, 'cause
popular?
there's
Like,
4 on 1 already.
Transformers
However,
are popular,
in
all
the
these
film-
things. So, I mean, let's just put it all in there and it'll be super effective. Go ahead.
In the film, Splinter was quite effective when fighting Shredder, even in his new robotic suit. However, you get the 4 turtles against Shredder, and they couldn't touch him. So I think there were some inconsistencies there. I mean, okay, so you give Shredder the suit to compensate for the size of the turtles. However, Splinter handled him. And I think that there could have been more consistency in the story.
That was the worst
Yeah,
part.
right
to
here.
Learn ninjutsu from a book.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I'd say if you're on the fence about seeing the movie, even though I watch it, the movie just for me is, I would still recommend you watching it because you might actually like the movie. So I mean, if you're on the fence about it, still go watch it. So
Or wait till it comes out on DVD and
Yeah.
you know.
The graphics were amazing. I think it has its good points. It really does.
All right. Yes, and then you and then you.
Alright, I did like it, but there are some parts that I didn't like it. I just did not like Megan Fox.
Well, yeah.
Agreed.
I mean, they had April. I don't know if I should say a spoiler,
No.
but I mean, if you've seen the movie, you know that the last part with the Shredder, I definitely didn't like.
Right. Edward Shredder hands. Yeah.
I felt like, it would have been more effective if she had been able to emote a little more than the turtles because she's
Agreed.
had so much Botox that she literally looks like,
Yeah,
all
yeah.
the time. I'm scared. Now I'm happy. But I'm really sexy. Like,
Yeah, they made her into a sex object, and she wasn't like that.
Right.
No, that's how she is in everything.
Yeah.
That's the only thing she can play.
Right. With my action
True.
figure's more expressive than her.
it was a little creepy how into April O'Neil Michelangelo was.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a part where he said his shell was getting tight, and I was like, whoa. There are children here, people. Come on.
And if I was Jonah Hill, I would sue. Because Michelangelo looks, acts, and sounds exactly like Jonah Hill. It's crazy.
Yep.
The one thing I will say about the movie, and it's a little thing. I could go on. We could have a whole panel about this movie. And this
Boy,
is a
wouldn't
this is
that
a
be
little thing.
fun.
If you haven't seen it, this really isn't a spoiler. It's just more of a physics thing. But there's a point in the film where Raphael, he says that his shell's been cracked as part of the combat. In combat, his shell got cracked. He said, "Tape me up." So you see him. He's kind of like, he's okay. But he's tape me up. Just tape me up. Well, he's not really in the action scene because he's apparently his shell's been cracked. And then like 5 minutes later, it's like the writers and the audience and everybody forgets about it. And he's like, he tells one of the other turtles to throw him, and because he's gonna knock over a Humvee.
This is in the trailer, so we're not
It's in the
we're
trailer.
not giving away anything.
And so Raphael gets catapulted, shell first, into this Humvee, bends it in half, and then goes rolling. And I'm like, I think a cracked shell wouldn't survive that. Just saying.
A cracked shell on a turtle is like a broken bone.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Stop being so
Definitely.
literal.
A little duct tape and he's okay.
Duct tape saves
Right.
the world.
Go ahead. Oh, well, this is sort of the end of our panel as far as showing you the evolution of the Ninja Turtles and the fact that they're going to continue to be with us for a long time. They're like Batman. They don't seem to be going away, and that's a good thing.
And they can constantly evolve, which is, I think, probably their biggest strength, is that they can just kind of evolve to whatever time period we're in. Because there's just so much room for growth within that franchise.
Yeah, so thank you so much for coming to our panel. We thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed it.
2 things. Number one, one, make sure you rate the panel within the app because that's what tells DragonCon that you want more content like this. And secondly,
And you want more RetroBlasting content.
yeah, and secondly, if you get a chance, go to our web channel. It's YouTube/RetroBlasting, and we've got lots and lots of videos about lots and lots of 80s stuff. And we've got cards up here in case you think you won't remember our name. We'd love to stay in contact with you
Yeah,
guys.
we do respond to emails. It doesn't go into the well. So please come up and get in touch with us. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Have a great con. Thank you.
Oh, you got one? Okay. Stick them over here.
Yeah.
I'm very disappointed.
Yeah. Oh, well, that was the combination of the multiple franchises. Right.
Wait, please. Yeah, let's go with these cards.
Right.
Let's pull some of these back.
Yeah.
These are our cards. You can take those if you want to, but these are our cards.
That was a mashup.
I really hope the new series lasts a long time. I do like it a lot.
Yeah, it's a fun series.
Yes, and I really like their new personalities.
Other stuff. Just like, yeah.
I'm probably one of the only ones.
What's that? You're one of the only ones what?
I'm probably one of the only ones that like their new personality in the new series.
Oh, in the new series? Yeah, I think they did a really good job.
Yes, and I do like the fact that Donnie has a crush on April. I really like that, and I will ship that.
It is more innocent though. It was not as perverse as Michelangelo's was in the movie.
Honestly, I find the Nickelodeon show was actually in some respects darker than the 2014 movie. Because if you have that one episode where the Rat King was trying to mutate the people in New York into rats, they showed that one scene where he had his first test subject in the corner, which was this messed up, mutated mass of a human just twitching in the corner. And like, that's all you see of him.
Well, and I think that goes back to kind of how society today is a little bit more desensitized than the kids were in the 80s.
I guess I get
showing
tired of
this
Michael Bay's,
half mutated person in the corner kind of twitching
so little
doesn't
plot.
really phase or scare the children anymore. So I think that they can introduce some of the darker elements into the new show, and it's not looked at as taboo as it was before.
Yeah, but I mean, I saw that and I was like, holy crap.
Yeah.
And then in the movie comes around, I'm like,
taking
shit,
out
the
lens
show's
flares,
darker
you
than
have
this.
addiction, and you need to get
Yeah,
it out.
they tried to bridge too much.